So how does the code work that's actually driving the LED to blink on this controller? That's what we're going to look at in this video. Up here at the top, we can see this /star, and then we can see some additional stars, and then the last line is //. This is what's called a multi-line comment. It allows you to leave a text message to yourself or another programmer as a little hint or reminder of what your code's doing. Ideally, you should have some multi-line comments at the start, but you shouldn't have multi-line comments throughout your sketch. You can use these single-line comments in your sketch if you need to leave any notes, okay? Because you're looking for your code to be written in a way that sort of makes sense and is legible, that people can read as if it's a sentence. So you shouldn't have to have big blocks of comments throughout your code. But at the start, it's a good practice to have to give an idea of what this sketch does. So this sketch is for the prism controller. It blinks the prism's red LED at a rate of 1 second, and we can see the author and the date. So you can alter this each time you make a new sketch. Keep this up here. It's a little note. It's a best practice for you, especially when we start saving this code online on our own personal repositories. So that's a multi-line comment. We're going to skip ahead that, and we're going to look at our first real line of code here on line 6. Okay, I'm going to get rid of these spaces. They're kind of bugging me. But this line here, this #include prism.h, is what links our current code to that Prism library that we installed. Anything that you do on this Tetrix Prism unit needs to have that include line. Okay, that's very important. If you do not have that, the most common error you're going to get down here is something not being defined or the library not being included. Okay, so we always want to include that library. And if you ever go and you get other pieces or components that attach to the Prism that aren't included in the base library, you would have an additional line here with another include statement for your additional libraries. Next, we have here on line 8 our instantiation of the object Prism. Okay, so we're going to get into this in a future class when we start talking about object-oriented programming, but what we can see here is that we have an object of type Prism, and we're giving it the name Prism. Okay, so whenever we want to refer to this controller itself, we're going to type in Prism, all lowercase, as seen here by the variable name. Next, we see void setup. Okay, this is a program fundamental. It runs once, and in this C++ or C#, it only runs once. Okay, and it's void setup. We're going to look at it, and it's going to say prism.prismBegin, and that is the function call. Okay, so that is a function, and if I was to take my book here, okay, so I'm showing you underneath the camera, I could look through here to find this function and find Prism Begin, and it's actually the first one in the chart on page 163. And it says Prism Begin is called in the Arduino code setup, and it initializes the Prism controller. It takes no data type, so it's an empty function, and it helps you reset and initialize the Prism controller. So this Prism.Begin is what's responsible for the interaction of that green button. It starts our code. Okay, so very handy to have that, so that when we wait for that, it's called, and then our program starts. When I come down here to void loop, okay, this is what we call our repeating program loop. This is where our code is placed, our actual logic, to keep the robot or our controller operating indefinitely until power is disconnected. We can also see the comment here says repeat the code in this loop. So when we get down to line 18, we see prism dot set red LED to high. And there's a lot of information in that one line of code that we're just going to quickly review. Prism, like we set up at the top, refers to the actual Prism unit that I'm showing you with my hand right here. That is the name we've given to this Prism. The dot is referred to as function dot notation. The function that follows is going to be applied to whatever precedes the dot. So set red LED is going to be applied or performed on this Prism. And then we're going to set the red LED with a data type. Okay, and this data type says high. And we can see that the comment says turn the red LED on. So high, just as a reminder, sends the voltage high, which is referred to as on. That will cause the LED to light up. We then come down here to delay, and we see delay for 1,000 milliseconds, which is a second. And then we come down a line again, and we see the same Prism setting the red LED low, and then we're waiting a second. So every second, it'll turn on, and then it'll turn off a second later, giving us that blink. So if I go ahead and hit green, our green button over here, we'll see our light turns on for a second, off for a second, on for a second, off for a second. And it does that forever until I either hit stop or I disconnect my power. One other thing to note here is that every line ends in a semicolon. Okay, so that's how we're going to end our code statement. And last but not least, if I ever change the name of my object, maybe I don't want to refer to my program as Prism. Maybe I want to refer to it as Mr. Slater. Wherever I use that lowercase prism, I'm going to have to go and copy and paste that variable. So while it is a lot of fun to rename your controller with an actual name, it can get quite annoying when you start building larger code bases or when you start integrating code, because then you have to make sure you always have the same variable name. So I'm going to get rid of that and just use Prism throughout. That is the basics of what's happening here. We're going to get more in depth into the different functions and data types in future lessons, but that's enough to get us to make sure that our board is working.